Jay Bilas.
Well, good evening. It is a pleasure to be with you here tonight, and I have to admit, before I really get started, I have to admit I've had a little bit of a rough day. My wife and I drove in from Charlotte, North Carolina, where we live, had a beautiful drive in, had a wonderful lunch with Mike Morrell and some of your great supporters here at UNC Asheville. But when I got to the arena tonight and walked in, I ran into one of your just really nice supporters who, when I walked in, did a little bit of double take and says to me, "Anybody ever tell you you look like Jay Bilas?" And I said, "Well, yes, sir, that happens to me all the time." And then he said, "Well, that must really piss you off." Then, in listening to your fine athletes tonight, I was so impressed, and especially with Cody when he spoke. And Cody used the word inimitable. And I was really impressed. I leaned over to my wife and I said, "What does inimitable mean?" And she said, "It means unique, you dumbass." My wife was a English major. But I'm here for one reason, and that's because my friend Mike Morrell asked me. 3-4 months ago, Mike called me, and I picked up the phone and said, "Hey, Mike." And he says, "Jay, do you believe in America?" I said, "Well, yes, I do, Mike, of course I do." He says, "Do you believe in the Constitution of the United States?" "Yeah, I do." "Do you believe in free speech?" I said, "Of course I do." And he said, "Then come to Asheville and give us one." So to Joe Kimmel, you had a goal of $10 million. I'd like to right now pledge my entire speaker's fee to you. And believe me, you're going to get what you paid for this evening. But I really am honored to be here. And I think for all of you who have supported and loved this great university, you have to feel extraordinarily proud of the young people that Debbie Antonelli had up here just a short while ago. And for me, I can't tell you what an honor it is for me not only to be with your fine young athletes and students here, your tremendous coaching staffs, but with a trusted and valued colleague in Debbie Antonelli. She is, there's nobody with whom I work that knows the game better and that communicates the game better than Debbie Antonelli. She's a treasure in the game of basketball, and I'm honored to be one of your colleagues. Ray was kind enough to mention that a million years ago, before the Pleistocene area, I played at Duke. And when it was, right now we're really celebrating in a lot of ways Coach K's last year in college basketball. He's announced his retirement at the end of this season. And it's a bit of an unusual feeling for me. I met Coach K when I was 17 years old, growing up in Los Angeles. And when he first called me to recruit me, I had never heard of him. And it seems strange that's the way it was back then. My first year as a player at Duke was his third year as the coach there, and they had never won. But for some reason, when he recruited me, I wanted to play for him. I really liked him. And I had a difficult time with my high school coach. It was not a good relationship for any of the players that had played for him. So when I graduated high school and when I started being recruited as a junior, the most important thing for me was the person I played for. It's supposed to be the school. I know what it's supposed to be, but for me, I figured the coach I wanted to play for was going to be at the school that I should be at. And for me, that wound up being Coach K, and it wound up being at Duke, and I was very fortunate to have that relationship for the last 40 years. I mean, it's 40 years ago that I signed a letter of intent to play at Duke. And that's a ridiculous amount of time. I had a chance to spend time with the players today, and one of the things I told them was I sat in their seat once and had to listen to old guys lecture and pontificate to me, and now it's their turn. But one of the things that I've been thinking about with Coach K retiring is the influence that he's had on my life. One as a player, then as an assistant coach, and then all these years later as a mentor and friend. And, we've had a relationship where I've been covering his teams. And I wrote down some things that made a tremendous impact on me. And I wanted to share a couple of those things with you because I'm not going to be able to share them much anymore. This is his last year. One was we had standards when I played for him, not rules. Look, we never had a curfew. We never had rules, but we had certain standards that we were expected to live up to. And the reason we never had a curfew is Coach K felt that if what we were doing, if we valued and prioritized what we were doing, we didn't need to be told what time to get our rest, that we were going to do that. And he basically told us that the decisions that we made would reveal what our priorities were. We could talk a good game as to what our priorities were, but our decisions would reveal those priorities. And he also instilled in us that everything we do is important. And we had a scouting report my freshman year one time, and you think when you're a freshman you're starting to figure things out. And he walked into a scouting report of a team that we were better than. And he came in and said, this is the most important game on our schedule. And boy, it kind of took me back a little bit thinking, well, we've got Maryland and North Carolina coming up and NC State and this program we're playing. How's that the most important? He said, it's the most important game on our schedule because we're playing it and everything we do is important. And he started talking about giving championship effort. If you want to play in championship games, you have to prepare for every game as if it's a championship game. And that's how you build toward that that's just the standard that to which you hold yourself. And he would give us examples of some of us had surgery during our time as athletes. And he said, if you're the fourth surgery on your doctor's day, do you want that doctor? Which surgery is most important to your doctor? And which is the most important to you? Now, your surgery is the most important to you, but it better be the most important to your doctor too, and treat it that way because you don't want it any other way. And my first game for ESPN was a Big South game. In 1995, I had Charleston Southern versus UNC Greensboro. And it was not considered a game that was going to get a big rating, but it was the most important game to me because I was doing it. That was my game. And I thought really hard about how important that game was to those players and how important it was to their families. And everybody that watched that game was important to them. And so I treated that as if it was the NCAA championship game. And I've tried to do that every game since then. My game's the most important game. That sounds selfish, but it's really a standard to which I hold myself. He also helped us understand what preparation really was. And we were in total control of our preparation and in total control of our effort. And he wanted us to be the most prepared team and felt that our confidence as players came from our preparation. And I've carried that through into my career as a lawyer and my career as a broadcaster. And I know Debbie is if not the most prepared broadcaster, there's nobody more prepared. And one of the things that I know for her and for me is with the preparation we do, it allows us when the game starts to react to what's going on in the game without thinking about stuff we need to get in. So I actually have some of my prep stuff with me because my wife and I are leaving tonight to fly somewhere, and I've got work with me. And I was looking at some of it earlier today, and I realized, of all the preparation I do for a game, I probably only use 10% of what I prepare. I just don't know which 10% is going to be, and I'm going to use it throughout the year. So all of it is valuable. But I don't know what's going to happen in these games. We like to give you the feeling we know exactly what's going to happen, but we don't. We have to be able to be prepared for anything and then react to it. And it allows you to rely on your instincts more so than to step in there like scripted. And I never want to be scripted in anything I do in a basketball game. So I want to have the humility to prepare and then the confidence to pull it off, which I think all the athletes in this room really understand and strive to. But that was one of the hallmarks that Coach K had, is preparation. And I've taken that into everything I do, whether it's my legal career, my broadcast career, everything I do, my preparation is the most important thing. And one of the last things is the concept of next play. It's something I say to myself every day. Coach K used to say it all the time: next play, next play. And he would talk about basketball being a continuous game, where, and really when you think about it, it's the only game I know of where you have to convert from offense to defense, and every player's got to play out. In baseball, I'm a big Dodger fan. Dodgers and Braves are going at it in the league championship series. But at the end of half an inning, heck, they get to run back into the dugout, and then they step up to plate to bat, then they run back out. We don't get to do that in basketball. I mean, you have to convert right away. And whether you made a great play or made a mistake, he would always say next play. Put yourself in the position mentally to make the next play. That play's over. So we'll deal with that later. We'll watch film, we'll correct it, we'll make whatever changes we have to make. But we can't stop and analyze this right now. Move on to the next play. And it's a great mental trigger for me when anything goes wrong or when I'm really proud of myself over something. Move on to the next play. My wife and I said it every once in a while to our kids when something would happen. They'd fall down, we'd say, move on to the next play. Next play. We actually had that happen to our son. He fell off a swing before we were going to go out to eat one night, and he broke his arm. We didn't know that. We shoved a popsicle in his mouth, said, next play. And social services were so nice the next day when they came to arrest us. But the last thing I wanted to communicate was the idea of empathy. That, you see Coach K on the floor, and, every once in a while he'll have pretty good snarl on his face, and he'll be laying into an official or, giving it to one of the players, and he's very competitive. But he's got a tremendous degree of empathy. He understands how difficult it is to compete in that arena. And he knows that it's much more difficult to be a player than it is a coach. And think about this for a second. In what walk of life do you have an opponent? Not very many things. You may have competition, but you don't have an opponent. I practiced law for a long time. I had they called it opposing counsel. You had competition in the courtroom, but I never had an opponent. Nobody ever guarded me stepping up to the lectern to make an argument at a motion hearing or at a trial. Nobody was physically trying to stop me from what I was trying to do. Coach K had really high standards, was really demanding, and still is, but he was never demeaning. He was demanding without being demeaning. And he challenged us to do our best, but always understood that what we were doing was really hard. And that meant a lot to us, that the respect that we got from him. And talked to us a lot about being the teammate that you want to play with. Because this is true in all walks of our lives. That we all know what we expect out of our colleagues, out of our teammates. Boy, we're pretty good at that. But when we look in the mirror, are we being the colleague or the teammate that we want? Because if we can't say that first, we don't have any business telling somebody else how they should do their jobs. And the other thing that Coach K would always talk to us about and talk to his Olympic teams about was ego. He never used the term or the phrase, check your ego at the door. He wanted all his players to bring their egos in with them, because there are a lot of good egos in our locker room and a lot of good players. And he wanted us to be the best that we could be, but make sure we blended our egos together to make sure we were a great team together. And we use that word a lot. We added together to just about everything we said. We weren't going to play hard. We were going to play hard together. We weren't just going to win. We were going to win together. We were going to do everything was going to be together, and we built that. And I want to close with a story that even now, Coach K has tremendous impact upon me. I'm not just recounting things from 30, 40 years ago when I played for him and coached under him, I learn things from him constantly. And a few years ago, when he was coaching the United States Olympic team, I was out in Las Vegas covering the team. And Coach K and General Martin Dempsey and Jerry Colangelo and I had a scheduled appearance at a military base in Las Vegas. So the night before the event, we were planning, hey, how are we gonna get there tomorrow? What are we gonna do? And Coach K says to me, we got a team meeting at 10 o'clock tomorrow, so meet me outside of meeting room A at 10:15, and then we'll hop in the car with Mr. Colangelo and General Dempsey, and we'll go to this appearance on the military base. So having played for him, I decided I'm gonna get there early, make sure he doesn't change anything, and I'm on time. Well, I got there before the meeting started, and I'm really glad I did, because as he was walking in, he sees me and says, hey, if you're here, come on in and sit in on the meeting. So I'm in this team meeting of the U.S. Olympic team with LeBron James, Russell Westbrook, Chris Paul, Kevin Durant, Paul George, DeMarcus Cousins, you name it, all the best players in the NBA and in the world. And Coach K goes through some of their team stuff. And as the meeting is ending, he looks at all these corporations, really, these multimillionaire players, and says to them, you guys, the meeting's over, and when you leave here and go back to your rooms, there's gonna be something waiting in your rooms. And it's gonna be your uniform, your USA basketball uniform. And I want you to do something. I want you to take that jersey, and I want you to lay it out on the bed, and I want you to stand there and look at it. And I want you to think about how cool this is that we get to do this. And he talked about, in all of our lives, we got our first jersey. When you're a kid, you got your first Little League jersey. When you're in high school, your first varsity jersey. The first time that all of these terrific young players put on a Bulldog jersey. For me, I played overseas. I got drafted. I played overseas. I had a number of different jerseys. I played USA basketball. All those things, And he says to these players, to LeBron and Durant and Westbrook, he says, we get to do some really cool things in our careers, in our lives, in our work lives. And if you're not careful, you can start thinking that this is routine. And he goes, it's not routine. And he looked at him and he said, don't take special for granted. And he said it again, don't take special for granted. And all of these players were really moved by that. And I know it moved me, because I started thinking about my own career. When I first started in broadcasting, I think Debbie would agree with this, I would have run somebody over to do the games I'm doing now. I would have run them over. Where I, sort of the games I'm doing now, I wasn't being assigned that in 1995 or 1997 or whatever. I've got it pretty good, and I appreciate it. But I started asking myself, have I taken what I get to do every day for granted? Because what I do is special. Walking into Kimmel Arena, walking into the Dean Smith Center, walking into Cameron Indoor Stadium or Allen Fieldhouse at Kansas. Very few people get to do that. And that's part of my job. Do I appreciate it? Am I expressing gratitude for it? Am I treating it as special as it is? And for all of these young athletes here, nobody else in the world is going to have the experience that you're having here. Nobody has the teammates you have. Nobody's got the coaching staffs. There may be others out there that think, North Carolina or NC State or Duke or UCLA, that's more special. It's not, because this is yours. This is yours. That's your jersey. This is your arena. These are your people, your teammates. So I'm hopeful that I'm not taking special for granted in my life. And I hope that you don't take it for granted in yours, because what you have here is really special. And for all the players, I had the chance to spend a few minutes with the men's team. You'll never have this again in your life, ever. You'll never have a coaching staff that's totally dedicated and an administration that's totally dedicated to making you better. And if you do have it later in life, you'll pay a lot for it. So you're really fortunate, and it is special, and treat it that way. And we talked a little bit earlier about it's not just winning, because your basketball teams are worthy of winning, but can you prove being worthy of winning every day? And treat all of these opportunities, the opportunity to go to practice every day, the opportunity to be together every day. Those are special, and treat it that way. I know you will, and I promise you that I've not taken special for granted. It's special for me to be here and to see Eddie Biedenbach, to be with Coach Brown, Coach Morrell, with all these players, with Debbie Antonelli, and I'm very grateful. So thank you so much for having me, and here's to a great year for the Bulldogs. Thank you.
Jay, thank you so much, Jay. Thank you for your nice comments, too. I really appreciate it. So, standards versus rules. We got that, right? Together, demanding, not demeaning. Okay. You've been so fortunate. You've had a 40-year relationship with your coach. I had a 30-year relationship with mine, Kay Yao at NC State. Here's what I want to know from you. If you can remove the emotion for just a second and tell us, what is it going to be like without Roy and Mike?
Well, it'll be different. I mean, the game wouldn't be the same without them having been in it. But, I grew up in Los Angeles, and when I was a kid, John Wooden was the head coach at UCLA. And he retired in 1975, and he was 65 years old. I thought he was the oldest man that ever lived. And yet, in the ACC, there are 5 or 6 coaches that are over 70. I couldn't have fathomed when I was younger that coaches would coach this long and show this sort of enthusiasm for their jobs. That was beyond retirement age back in the day. So the game has continued to do well after Coach Wooden, after Coach Knight, after Coach Smith, and it'll do well after Coach Williams and after Coach K. It's just the beauty of this, when Coach Williams retired, announced his retirement, we had about a week to kind of celebrate him. I didn't think it was enough. Coach K, the way he's chosen to do it, may not be everybody's cup of tea, but I think we've got it. I'm hopeful that we can enjoy, the competition. So we'll give him a nice ovation at every game and a rocking chair, and then hopefully the fans will boo him at an away game, and the competition will be great. But we won't take this, how special he's been, for granted this year. It's an opportunity to celebrate an amazing legacy. But whenever John Shire, when he takes over, he'll do great. Hubert Davis will do great. And it's sort of the natural order of things, so I'm not particularly worried about it.
We're not going to take up too much more time, because as a Dodgers fan, I hate to tell you, they're down 2-0 in the second.
I'm not
all right,
I'm not
there's
worried
a lot of Braves fans here, I'm sure.
Coming back 3-1 isn't going to happen. I know that.
The last thing I want to ask you is, the very beginning, Janet had mentioned that gender equity is a really important part of UNC Asheville. I know, because of our conversations, that you are a big fan of women's basketball and that you care about the game. You advocate for the women's game. What do you think about the chance that men's and women's Final Fours will be in the same city? What's your thoughts on that?
I'm okay with any idea. Let's explore any idea to make the game better and to elevate the women's game. First of all, the women's game doesn't need my support or my help. The women's game is killing it, and it will continue to grow. All it has needed is the same resources, and that's all anybody can ask. The one thing that I don't want to see happen is, because the NCAA was embarrassed by the missteps of last year, which to me indicated systemic issues that need to be addressed. Is it really the best thing for the game to have both men and women in one city for the Final Four and cut the number of hotel rooms down and make it more difficult? And the women's tournament it doesn't need the men's tournament. It's an extraordinary event. It rates just as well. I mean, it's awesome. So who's it going to make feel better that we do that? We should do what's right for the women's game. If it's the best thing, I still think it remains to be seen. It's an interesting idea, but I haven't heard a lot of coaches in the women's game step forward and say, "Yep, this is what we want." I don't believe they do want it, but it's going to take several years anyway because of all the contracts we have for us to do it. So hopefully we'll have a deliberate, smart approach to it. And my guess is we won't do it, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, my research indicates the women are not in favor of it. So I hope the same thing. I hope that they'll make a deliberate attempt to research and find and fact find and vet through the whole thing. Let's hope. One more thing. The governance of the NCAA looks like it could be changing. Are you in the room when they're writing the new Constitution? And if not, how do we get you in there?
They'll never let me in there.
The problem is there's something, security has got your face up there at
exactly.
NCAA, right?
The problem is they let me in the 80s. When I was a player, I was on the NCAA's long-range planning committee. So I learned how policy was made and was pretty vocal about what I liked and didn't like. And I started digging in on policy. That was probably not the smartest decision to let me in the room so I could get involved in that stuff. But I love college sports. I don't have any problem with the NCAA. It's certain policies that I think have been wrong. And I think the Supreme Court kind of proved me right that some of the policies are illegal. But what we're going to see going forward is deregulation. The NCAA knows it can't govern this legally. So they're going to leave it up to the schools and the conferences to do so. That's going to feel different, but it's going to be fine. And, NIL, people seem worried about it. And some people will say, well, now it's the wild, wild west, which is what the rest of us live in. That's called business. Nobody calls it the wild, wild west when somebody offers us a contract or offers us money or something. That's just normal business, and it makes perfect sense. When it's a college athlete, now it's the wild, wild west. We're going to be just fine with all this. One of my best friends in coaching, I was teasing him the other day. He was talking about all the difficulties of NIL, and I told him, I said, look, if players weren't allowed to drive until now, and all of a sudden the NCAA said players are allowed to drive cars now, I know exactly what you'd say. You would say, what's going to happen now? They've got to get insurance. They've got to have their cars registered. They've got to keep their license up. They're going to have to change the oil. Somebody's going to get in an accident. They're going to get parking tickets. It's going to be chaos. No, it's not that big of a deal. The coaches need to quit worrying about it. It's a change from the system we've had, which was wrong and unfair for a lot of years. And I think everybody here tonight can tell, when you see these young men and women here, they're extraordinarily smart and capable. Inimitable, really.
Thank you, Wendy.
But they can handle this. It's not that big of a deal.
Well, I want to thank you, Jay. Those questions came from our audience. King Prather, UNC Asheville Board of Trustees, he sent one in. Charles Frederick from TD Bank sent one in, and also our good friends Tom and Sandy Bowles, who I met earlier. So thank you all for sending those questions in prior to the event tonight. Jay, thank you.